what you're doing, I think, is the role model for every.
This is the new church.
Right, 100%.
Hi, welcome to Storia, where storytellers disrupt. I'm David Nolot.
And I'm Fabiano Altamora.
And before we dive in with our very special guest, please remember to like, subscribe, follow, and give us that 5-star review.
And we have the amazing honor of having the award-winning director and friend, Benji Nolot, in the studio with us today. Hi, Benji.
What's up, guys?
It's so good. Well, Benji started his career at Saddleback College. He's known for feature films Nefarious, Liberated the New Sexual Revolution, Raised on Porn, Buying Her, has been nominated for Best Director at multiple festivals. His film and videos have received more than 40 million views worldwide and have been screened for legislators at the highest levels of government in the US, UK, Canada, and Australia. He's also the founder and CEO of Exodus Cry, which is committed to abolishing sex trafficking and commercial sexual exploitation, assisting and empowering its victims, and educating the public about these horrific crimes. If there has ever been a disruptive storyteller that I've known, it's Mr. Benji Nolot.
Man, welcome. It's such an honor and a privilege to hang out with you. Benji, one of the questions that I've been aching to ask you is this, man, and I just kind of want to dive right in with you, man. You, just by listening to the titles, and I've had the privilege of seeing many of your films, some of which, I've gotten to see before they were even widely released. I have to ask you, man, is there a toll to being the type of storyteller that you are?
I heard a message once by David Wilkerson talk about how anything that is of God is birthed in anguish. And I think it's a lost art of our time. It's a lost value of our time. There's a consciousness that's prevalent today that is about being positive, self-help, medicating, whatever thing, you might be feeling a little anxious about. There's a positive side of that. We want people to have, good mental health and to be able to enjoy life and have healthy connections and relationships. But you have to create space in your life to be able to sit with the things that are not positive. Mm-hmm. So Jesus said this phrase about his generation. He said, I played the funeral dirge and you did not mourn. I played the timbrel and you did not dance. It's this idea that they couldn't enter into either the mourning, the grieving, or the celebration. Their hearts were just kind of apathetic and anesthetized to the realities of life that take us through these valleys and these hills. And so I think that a huge part of my calling in this space of anti-trafficking work, and also as a storyteller, has come through that valley of Achor, has come through that place of tears, anguish, sitting with and creating space for the tragedies of our generation, and with a posture of, Jesus, I want to carry the burdens that you're carrying. I want to dream dreams that you're dreaming. I want to be a friend of Jesus who goes with him into the Garden of Gethsemane. There was only a small handful that Jesus invited into that sacred place of tarrying with him in the place of his own anguish. So there's been this cry of my heart of, I have been wounded by the injustice of human trafficking, and I pray that I never recover from it. I feel the dignity and the sanctity and the sacredness of being invited to tarry with Jesus in that place. And then out of that, I feel like there are two things that pierce the human heart, tragedy and beauty. So to be able to weave those into our storytelling creates the capacity for an authentic, transformational human experience. But like Robert Frost said, if there are no tears in the author, there are no tears in the reader. So one thing that one of my mentors always said is, your tears mark your path. So I'm just trying to be sensitive to the things that have moved my heart, that bring me to tears, to create space for that. And then to honor that by stewarding, these projects and these stories that we work on with a lot of sensitivity. And, so that's just like a little bit of kind of my philosophy of tackling a subject that's so disturbing and grievous, and, the injustice of it and all of that. I actually do have a value for that very thing.
I've never heard it. I mean, that's something that I've never even considered, how that form of storytelling, the way you just so beautifully put it. Like, when did you realize then that this is what you wanted to do with your life, to highlight the injustices of human trafficking? Did the Lord speak to you in a dream? What was it that caused you to start this journey?
Yeah, I mean, there's probably a few different ways to come at that question. There are layers to this for me. One thing that I'll mention is that I remember having a conversation with a friend in Kansas City, and she talked about this idea of weeping over the Word of God. And she cited some examples from her own life, from the life of somebody who was a mentor to both of us. This person was like a very prominent worship leader. And I was really inspired by the conversation. And I'm like, I remember, being touched in a worship context one time, and being moved to a place of tears. I'm like, I don't know that I've ever wept over the Word of God. I'm like, and I just remember being struck by like the indifference of my own heart. And I'm like, but a sincere believer. And it birthed this desire in me for a tender heart. So I actively started to pray for that. I started to pray, God, give me the gift of a tender heart. And about a month or two later, a man named John Dawson came out to this ministry that I was attending. He gave a message on all the injustices that are facing women around the world. Unique situations. I think it was written like a devotional. So it was like a month's worth of, different injustices that women were uniquely facing, females uniquely facing in the world. So like one example of that being, genital mutilation, things like that females were uniquely facing different parts of the world. That's not to say that men aren't facing any injustice. It's just, this was an emphasis on that. I come in at the tail end of this message, and he gives an invitation for people who want to receive God's heart for women. And I just, I didn't even hear the message. A bunch of people went up to the altar. I didn't even go up to the altar. I just kind of raised my hand in the back. And he prayed a prayer. I think it got me.
Yeah.
I think the prayer got me, because a month later, I had my encounter with the issue of human trafficking. So to answer your question directly, I didn't go to anti-trafficking school. I had no plan of fighting human trafficking. I had no knowledge that slavery or trafficking even existed in the world. So it was about a month and a half after that experience that I have this burning bush encounter around the issue of human trafficking that launches me into a season of deep travail. And so God deposited in me a heart of compassion that I did not have before. It was a gift of compassion and a gift of tenderness. And so for a season, we labored in the place of intercession and travail and birthing prayer around this issue. And it was so formative and marking, and it totally, disrupted and redirected the course of my entire life.
Benji, how do you decide what story you're going to tell next? What's your decision-making process for each film look like?
First of all, let me just say one thing real quick. You can edit this out if you want. I love both of you guys. I love the spirit of friendship that is on you, the friendship that you guys model, that you have with each other, and what you're modeling. And what I love about you is every time we get together, you say, very similar things every time. What do you need? How can I support you? Let me connect you with this person. Let me help you with that situation. I have never met somebody who was so supportive, so encouraging, and so willing and proactive to follow through on those things. I don't know how much room you have in your life for those to be a friend in that way, but you've really impacted my life and have actually helped activate and catalyze my own destiny and calling in the things that I'm doing right now in this very space.
Thank you so much, bro.
There's a few big things I could share, but yeah, you've been a huge catalyst. And so I love you guys. I just feel so honored just to share the space with you right now. And I wanted to sneak that in because I'm afraid that we'll get away from us. I won't be able to.
That's made me super emotional.
You made an Italian cry, which is maybe not a difficult thing, but it's a beautiful thing to behold.
Like, thank you, dude. That means a lot, bro. Thank you. Like, really, thank you. That means a lot.
It's meant a lot. It's a lot to me. Yeah, no. Like I said, you guys can edit that if you want. I needed to mention it.
So beautiful.
I love it. I'm gonna clip it and send it to Fab so he can wake up to you every morning.
Oh, beautiful.
That's all.
So Benji, tell me a little bit about now how you decide. I mean, none of your projects, like I said, I've had the privilege of watching several of them. You and I had a conversation early on. I think it was, I can't recall the title, but it was the Spring Break. I call it the Spring Break documentary. Yeah. And I remember interviewing you for Bethel TV at the time, I believe, about that. I also remember before I went on missions to Mtwapa, Kenya, I actually remember watching Nefarious, I believe that it was, which was kind of deeply educational for me because I'd never, kid from the barrio in Miami, much like what you described, I didn't really fully appreciate. I mean, I knew peripherally about forms of prostitution or whatever, but I had no concept of what I was about to step into. And if there was any preparation to see girls that were 6 years old who had already been sex trafficked in their life, I think Nefarious gave me some framework for what I was about to see and encounter. But how do you decide? Clearly sex trafficking and things related to women's tragic issues that they're facing on the planet are part of your itch, part of your calling, part of the thing. But how do you choose each topic? How do you find that?
Yeah. So there's a couple qualifiers for that. I'm sure you have a lot to say about this as well. I don't know. I'm sure your audience knows you well, but you're very humble, David, and you're also like an extremely accomplished actor in some really big projects. So I'm sure you have a lot to say to this as well. So if I could just humbly contribute my own little piece to this. I look primarily at a couple factors. So one is, there's a huge difference between coming upon a story or a situation that I care about versus am I going to make a movie about this? Because that's a different level of dedication. So first of all, one qualifier is, this is a simple one, is like, is this story newsworthy? That's a consideration for us because, of course, if we're going to dedicate the time, resources, and energy that it takes to make a documentary, we want to know that we're contributing something that's actually relevant to our culture, where we're at right now as a society and a generation, that is actually has the potential for impact.
Can I ask a follow-up on that?
Noise. Yeah.
Let me ask a follow-up on that, because a lot of people don't appreciate this. And one of the things that we tell our storytellers is, listen, you're not just asking somebody to show up for 2 hours or 90 minutes or a few episodes. Like, this is an exchange of human life. Mm-hmm. Like, Benji Nolot has to dedicate years of his life, then multiply that by his team, then his financiers. Every dollar is an exchange of human life. Then you ideally have millions of people exchange a piece of their life to come. Just because we put Jesus's name on it does not necessarily entitle us to an audience. There's an exchange of human life and of worthiness that goes into this. I mean, how many years and how much time just on that subject before we move on to some of your other qualifiers? Like, what does taking on a film look like for you? How many of Benji Nolot's, days and life does he have to exchange for a film?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question, because I think I'm starting to measure my life in terms of film projects that I have left in me. And start tackling these bigger projects, you realize just how finite our lives are. And I'm like, oh, I have a limited capacity for like doing these films, like telling these stories. And it's not the limited is not, it's not 100. It's like a handful.
Yep.
It's a really like, sober thing to consider when you think about it that way. Like, the big picture of my life's work, I've got a minute to tell a handful of stories. So it does bring into perspective, does this story have the capacity for impact? And that's not a guarantee that it will bring an impact, but does it at least have the capacity for that? Mm-hmm. And then right alongside that, and I think this ties into your question as well, is this a battlefield that is worth dying on? Wow. So what I mean by that is just, again, along the lines of what you just mentioned, that there's so much time, resources, and energy that go into making a film that, it's going to require something from me, that has to, I have to care enough about the story that it's going to sustain me through the difficulty and the challenge of making that story over years. So I'm just going to put a placeholder on that thought real quick and jump over to something else. I can't even tell you how many people I know who either want to start a project or have a half-baked project or left a project behind that they started. There are so many people who get going on their passion project, their documentary, whatever, and then run out of steam. And so it's a very common thing in this space. So there really has to be some kind of internal driving, compelling force that's going to help push you through the obstacles of, and challenges of getting a story made. And, I love what Guillermo del Toro says. He says, obstacles are your path. So it's when you find a story that is a battlefield worth dying on, it changes your perspective from looking at obstacles as reasons to quit. And you start looking at them as not only challenges to overcome, but the very things that are forging and crafting your path in front of you. So that's the second thing. I'll pause there for a moment in case you guys want to jump in, but there's a couple more. But I don't know if you guys have another thought.
I love the idea that obstacles are in your way because you're on your path.
It's character development 101, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, a speed bump out in the woods, I guess, is not a speed bump.
Yeah.
It's just a rock.
Yeah.
but a speed bump. But I love this idea that an obstacle is actually an indication that you're actually on the right path. Listen, I got to ask, like on average, because I'm just fascinated by the amount of time that it takes. And I know from my own limited experience, I've only made 2 films. On average, how many Benji Nolot years get invested in on average in every single one of your films?
Average 5-ish years.
Wow.
Yeah.
The only one longer is Ken Burns, who may spend about 10 to 15 years. Wow, Benji, that's no small piece of life, man.
So five years per film?
Yeah, that's about average.
Gosh.
About average.
So even on Buying Her and Raised on Porn, they were 5 years in development.
Yeah, Buying Her was 10 years in development.
Oh my goodness, because I had the pleasure of working with Benji on Buying Her and Raised on Porn, but wow, that's amazing.
Now those are overlapping, right? So I'm assuming that you've got some in pre, some in production, some in post, or do you have some overlapping happening there?
Yeah. Yep. And there's a lot to say about all that. I think just going back to kind of the main point is that, we started with a philosophy of, we're going to go knocking on doors and just going to kind of fall, we're going to step through those open doors. And I think that's like a pretty common Christian value ethic. Where is God opening doors? We had to kind of like adjust our philosophy to if it's a closed door, kick it down. Because in this space, especially of documentary filmmaking, nothing happens easily. In most cases, people are not excited about you showing up to make a documentary. So there's a lot of like massaging back and forth. There's a lot of, you're just wearing multiple hats to kind of navigate, a lot of, difficult situations to investigate in a meaningful way the subject matter, to be able to compile a story and then eventually shape that into a story that's contributing a perspective that's meaningful to our society and is going to help bring bring people deep below the surface level of consciousness where they live their normal lives. That whole process is a lot of challenges. I don't say that to valorize our work. I say it to be realistic for people thinking about doing this, of what's involved. There's a lot of people that want to make documentaries, and it's the old like saying, like, if you can do something else, then you should. The only way to make documentary is that there's nothing else you can do. You're so completely possessed that you must do it, and then go ahead and do it.
Yeah, my career advice is go be a surgeon on Mars. That might be easier.
But like a lot of filmmakers, and I don't know if you can get away with this more in the documentary space than you can in the kind of traditional narrative space, but you don't hold anything back in your documentaries. And a lot of the time, a lot of Christian filmmakers will try and sanitize what it looks like. How have you found the church have received you? And do you feel you've got more kind of leeway and grace because it's a doc?
So, Alfred Hitchcock said this. He said, in narrative films, God is the director. In documentary films, he said in narrative films, the director is God. In documentary films, God is the director.
Yeah.
So it's this idea that as a documentary filmmaker, you really have to give priority to the story as opposed to your own agenda. And it doesn't mean that you don't have a perspective, but you have to be willing to dispense with your own agenda in favor of the story. So my view as a documentary director is that I am responsible to steward the story from conception to completion. And that sometimes the story goes in a direction, develops in a way that I would not have anticipated. If my agenda is it has to be this way, then I feel like I would actually be deforming and undermining the authentic nature of what this story wants to be. So sometimes I look at my own films and I'm like, that's not necessarily the film I would have made. I feel like I was like stewarding something that kind of took shape in this certain way. And I just have a commitment not to compromise or sugarcoat whatever that is. So I know we're kind of like riding this really fine line in terms of the intensity and the provocative nature of what some of these films have evolved into. But I think that is just, existentially speaking, I feel like that is my job and my primary responsibility. So this ties into, a third factor in considering a story to tell. So is this newsworthy? Is this a battlefield worth dying on? And then the third thing is this idea again of following your tears. Is this story something that has marked me personally in a deep way? And so for somebody who maybe is thinking of like, is maybe at that point where they go, I want to make my first film, a short film, a student film, a documentary, whatever. I think these are like really helpful qualifiers. I mean, just starting with like, is there something in your life that has moved you to the point of tears? Because if there is, then there's something that there's something going on there at a deeper level. And you're probably the right person. You're probably the right person to give expression to that. So there's this poem by Khalil Gibran that says, our heart knows in silence the secret of the days and the nights, but our ears thirst for the sound of our heart's knowledge, that we would know in words that which we have always known and thought, that we would touch with our fingers the naked substance of our dreams. And it's this idea, this poem is this idea that there is something that is a feeling that happens like deep within us. When we're moved to tears, you can't immediately identify consciously what that is. And if you try to do so, you might actually shut down the very life that's happening inside of you. There is something to be said for just being present with those feelings and emotions. So for me, the creative process is like tapping into that deeper gut level feeling and going on the journey of finding cinematic expression of that in a language that's coherent. And that takes years. In most cases, it's not something, again, especially in the realm of documentary, because everything's being engineered in post as opposed to narrative where you're engineering everything on the front end. And that's a whole other workflow and process, which I have great appreciation for and love as well. In the documentary space, you find yourself in a situation where God is the director. And there are so many things that are just outside of your control, outside of your agenda. And of course, you're going to bring a perspective, that is germane to who you are. But the story takes shape in a way of really processing over time those deep existential feelings and the journey of trying to find some kind of coherent cinematic language to express that. It's the journey of itself is so much a part of like the beautiful aspect of being a storyteller, because you're being shaped through it. There's so many things that I've encountered in this that have changed me and that I never knew I was even signing up for. And so, I think being a storyteller is one of the highest callings, of what it means to be human and what it means to be a person of impact and to have a meaningful place in society. I think that being a storyteller is of the highest dignity and calling that we have as humans.
Don't you love what you just said about the art changing the artist?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
I do. There's this guy that we study called Truby in the screenwriting program, and he has this book called The Anatomy of the Storyteller. And in it, he talks about this device called the storyteller device. And the reference that I like to use is Morgan Freeman in Shawshank Redemption, who in voiceover is kind of telling us the story. And he says a couple really beautiful, deep things about it that I had never read in any of the storybooks prior to discovering Anatomy of a Story. He says the one requirement of using the storyteller device as they do in Shawshank is that for it to not be just passive voiceover where you're basically just trying to like spackle over expositional gaps, is that the storyteller must actually be telling the story from a place of perspective and must be changed by the act of telling the story itself. And what you see with Red and Shawshank is that as he tells the story, he's telling it from this place of change, and he's changed by actually telling the story. Benji, selfishly, I got to follow up on some of your films because I've seen a good portion of them. I've seen the most recent one, which I have to admit was not an easy watch, but was revelatory and eye-opening, as all of your films are. But I actually want to rewind back to, again, what I call the Spring Break film. The title of that film for our audience, can you remind us?
The title of the most recent one?
No, of the Spring Break film.
Oh, Liberated, the New Sexual Revolution.
So in Liberated, there was a young man who slept with, I don't even know, countless women, sometimes multiple girls. And I always wanted to follow up and ask you, as a storyteller, one that steps in and is not concerned about asking some tough questions. I have to ask, as a documentary filmmaker, did you know, as you were interviewing this guy, following this young man and some of his friends, did you know that he didn't realize what he might be saying about himself for a really long time? I mean, did you get the sense that he was conscious of what he was actually revealing about himself to the world?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think for me, we have to, you go into these environments and you're having to balance, a few different considerations.
Okay.
One first is you're trying to balance your quest for truth.
Yep.
With also a compassionate consideration for the people that you are interviewing. And in Michael Ravager's book, Directing a Documentary, he talks about the conflict of, do you like this idea that, is your sense of moral obligation to the individual who might be brought to a point of discomfort through the telling of this, or to the truth that may transcend their discomfort at their own depiction. So there's this ethical issue at hand. And then he settles the ethical issue with this statement that the French make, une tentative. This idea that even our best attempt to reconcile all the ethics involved with documentary filmmaking is still, at the end of the day, just one person's small attempt to contribute something meaningful to this world. So it helps kind of like take some of the angst out of some of the conflicting moral and ethical obligations that you feel as a filmmaker when you go into this. Because yeah, for sure, I'm like thinking of him from the perspective of a dad, and from the perspective of when I was his age, and from the perspective of how is somebody going to see this at home, and from the perspective of, do you even fully understand what it is that you're saying? But then also having to, at some level, not relate to him through my own projection of what he may think or who he may be years from now, but accepting at face value where he's at and letting his perspective be what it is. These are all like really complicated and conflicting ethical considerations. In a simple way, our commitment to our interview subjects is we're going to create a platform for your perspective. So we may, the overall piece may disagree with your perspective. It may agree with your perspective. Like, I don't know where this all will land, but your perspective will be given a platform. You will be given a voice in this. And so at some level, you have to accept that other people, have the responsibility of taking ownership of their own lives and perspectives, even when they're ones that you disagree with and that maybe you feel embarrassed by for them. And so, so Liberated was really put us kind of in the middle of a lot of like these ethical, concerns and considerations. And there's a pretty cool redemptive storyline with all that. But yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
Can I ask about the redemptive? Are you able to say, like, because that was going to be my follow-up question for you, and you don't have to name names, or you can, but that's your decision. But in the telling of someone's broken perspective in that moment in their life I guess going back to the storyteller device, in the telling of their story or in participating in your telling of some aspect of a moment in their story, has it ever led any of your subjects to healing, redemption, or some turnaround in their life?
Yeah, totally. And it goes back to, the movie that you referenced, Shawshank Redemption. I think you grow through what you go through. And there's this passage of transformation. And in Shawshank Redemption, he trudges through that tunnel of
sewer line,
sewage and pollution. And he kind of like drudges through that and then enters into the waters and emerges out of it in the rain and just receives this providential washing of everything that he just had to go through. And so it's this beautiful, not only very highly functional and practical part of the story, but this also really beautiful metaphorical picture of patterns and cycles in our lives. And so I just think, like, for anyone who's find themselves drudging, this is depicted also in Hind's Feet in High Places and in lots of beautiful literature, this idea of persevering through those moments and seasons of life when you can't even see your hand in front of you. Everything feels like sewage and you're just trudging through it, knowing that on the other side of that tunnel, there are rains of refreshing. There are the waters of baptism. There's renewal and rebirth. And so, we went through this incredible, moment and period of Shay's life and of his friends when in many ways they were sort of, trudging through the sewage of what life is for many people at that age, now participating in the hookup culture and drunkenness and just all the revelry of that. Yet while we were doing that, we were driving them around all these places. There was this song that they wanted us to play over and over by Swedish House Mafia. And the name of the song is, the lyrics are, don't you worry, child. Heaven's got a plan for you.
Oh, I know that track. I know that track. It's a crazy track that you would not expect to have that sentiment in that. Yeah.
So they're having us play this during the time that we're in spring break. And we're not paying attention to the lyrics. It's just like an EDM track. They're stuck on it. So it's on repeat the whole time. Now, 5 years later, when Shay joins us for the tour of Liberated, he's gone through this period of growth and transformation in his own life. And there's this one drive. We were on the road for about 7 hours. And I'm just trying to share with him my perspective of the kingdom of God and who Father God is. And we're having this pretty like deep spiritual conversation. And the picture that I describe is that God is like a father who is, has a house on a hilltop overlooking this vast, beautiful property. And there's a sound that goes forth and he calls and invites people to himself in it. As I'm describing this, that song comes back to mind. And the song is literally, there's a father in a house over a blue lake saying to his son, don't you worry, child. Heaven has a plan for you. And all I could think in that moment is, my gosh, like here Shay was trudging through the absolute sewage of life, like just, unbridled, embracing a life of unbridled immorality. And in that place, when he was in full blown rebellion to God, when he was taking advantage of other people, when he was, dissipating his own life and all of these things, in that place, God was speaking over him. Don't you worry, child.
Come on.
I've got a plan for you. Like, I mean, the thought that Father God sees us in that place and isn't threatened by us, isn't threatened by our rebellion, by our immaturity, by our immorality, but in that place is saying, I've got a plan for you. So I'm reminded of this song. I'm like, Shay, do you remember that song about the father talking to his son, saying, Shay starts weeping. The power of God hits him in the car. I got one hand on him, one hand on the wheel, and I'm driving. And mind you, this was a movie that I had so much persecution from other believers in churches related to, because they just couldn't reconcile or wrap their mind around what it was. So there's redemption for Shay in this moment, but there's also redemption for me, because I'm like, God works in mysterious ways. I'm trying to steward these stories. Like I said before, I don't let them be governed by my own agenda to this, or this. They're going to be what they are. And sometimes that looks pretty messy to people. So I have one hand on the wheel, one hand on Shay. I'm getting rocked. He's getting rocked. We get to the hotel. I'm going to leave a few things out of this story, but that night he has a dream. And the next morning we wake up and he goes, I had this dream. He goes, and in the dream, he goes, you were talking with another person who I knew was like a mentor type figure, to me. And he said, and you guys were talking, you were having a meeting. And he said, and I felt so ashamed. Like I couldn't be a part of this conversation. And he said, and then there was a person who joined you who I knew was a father figure. And he said, and that feeling of shame intensified. And he said, and the feelings of my own isolation and alienation and shame intensified. And he is kind of like backed away. And he said, and then the father suddenly shifted his gaze to me. And he said, when he did that, I felt so, embarrassed and like, oh no, I'm seen. And the father figure, he said, at this point, he starts getting tears. He goes, the father figure points at me and he says, son, I love you. And, he wasn't connected to his own feelings of self-worth enough to fabricate a dream like that. No. That was a dream from heaven. That was heaven confirming the song, confirming the talk in the car, confirming to pursue somebody who spent so much of their life trying to run from him because of a deep place of their own brokenness, and the reckless love of the Father who will chase us through spring break, chase us through sewage pipes, chase us in our place of shame to impart a message to us of love and redemption and acceptance. And, I can't make these things up. I just, it's that saying from Alfred Hitchcock. In documentary films, God is the director. So many times I find myself just sitting back and observing the providential movements of a God who is alive and active and recklessly in love with humanity and constantly chasing down the most broken who are full of shame. And it just, the fact that I get to witness this and have a front row seat to it is so incredibly marvelous. And so to be with Shay in that place and having all these ethical conflicts of what's this going to mean for him? And this is, all of this. And then just, it's like it says in Ephesians that we are God's workmanship. That word workmanship is poema. It means poem. That God's writing a story. And if we just create space for it, if we don't try to take control of everything and we're willing to let God move and act and willing to let situations breathe and willing to remain faithful over years, I just feel like God's always, always, always moving things towards some redemptive end, towards some beautiful poem, some incredible storyline and picture that we could not have imagined or fabricated in our own human strength or ingenuity. So there's an aspect of the providential presence and power of God in our storytelling that I think is just absolutely incredible, that we get to be co-creators with the uncreated God of the universe. It's mind blowing.
I'm reminded, I think we're both wrecked by, I've got so many things I want to say to you. I'm reminded, Francis Chan wrote this book called Erasing Hell. And there's this statement that it cut me so deeply when I read it. It was early on in my faith, and somehow Francis Chan and Erwin McManus were like on my left and my right shoulder, just speaking to me. And somewhere in the middle were Tim Keller and C.S. Lewis. But I remember Francis Chan in Erasing Hell, this line: "I'm no longer going to try to be God's publicist. I'm no longer going to try to sanitize or clean up his image." And when I'm hearing you share about Shay, and I've honestly been curious about this kid for years, since I watched the film. In the moment when I'm seeing him do crazy things on camera, I'm thinking to myself, man, how does Benji navigate this? And you've expressed it all, but I just can't shake the image, Benji, that you're like a modern day Jeremiah, like a prophet who is willing to just confess the unsanitized image of Father God and willing to weep literally over sewage cakes in the street and cry out to the people and not try to edit the Father, but to literally be his mouthpiece. And by getting out of the way, I mean, it's just nuts to me that God reveals himself through a 4 on the floor EDM track and somehow does it 5 years later, comes back through your mouth. It's crazy.
And I love the fact you're so unapologetic about it. And I know you've got such a sensitive heart, but you've got to tell the story. We, can find ourselves in a situation as storytellers where we feel that, we have to put 5 scriptures,
right,
an altar call, and then a 90s rock band to kind of qualify what a faith-based film is. Right. And it's kind of like what you're doing, I think, is the role model for
This is the new church.
Right. 100%.
Tim Keller just in The Atlantic wrote about how the church needs a new revival. And, even Tim Keller is confessing that there is some sort of decline in the American church. And I think it's because we've got Gen Z on TikTok looking at some version of the brutal truth of humanity and obviously other things as well. And then we've got Benji prophesying the truth.
Authenticity, being a leader, a father in this movement that's got so much integrity. But I'm like, I just applaud you for it, Benji. I really do, because, you're not sanitizing anything, but there again, you're not glorifying.
Right.
You're telling the story. And I'd be interested in how you would navigate this level of content in a narrative space as well, with your upcoming feature. Are there any other factors that you have to consider when doing that? Because obviously there's no such thing as a Christian filmmaker. We love Jesus and we love telling stories. So in a roundabout way, is there anything that you're treating the narrative as different to your approach to documentary?
Yeah, I mean, I think the two guiding principles, tragedy and beauty, are the two things that pierce the human heart. So I'm interested in working on projects that optimize the potential for creating a transformational experience for people who come to watch it. And so I got schooled actually by a friend one time who's not a filmmaker. We were out surfing. He was going through a hard time and he's like, got in a huge fight with his wife. He's like, so I went out to watch a movie, and just mindlessly I said, oh yeah, sometimes you need to check out. And he goes, no, I don't go to movies to check out. I go watch movies to find myself in the story and remember that I'm alive. And I was like, wow. Yeah. And I was like, okay. And it was a good check for me, of like staying grounded as a filmmaker in that reality, because there are so many things that compete for our attention in this space that are inherently egotistical or vain. And you can get caught up with the aesthetics of a thing. You can get caught up in the glamour of a thing. There's a lot of pitfalls. There are a lot of trapdoors in this environment. So I think it's really important to stay grounded in some like really foundational principles when it comes to, what meaningful storytelling looks like. And at the end of the day, it's not just one thing. I have worked on documentaries where I felt like it was really important to provide a palpable, cathartic, redemptive storyline, to resuscitate people's hope and create some kind of emotional satisfaction and healthy, emotional outlet for them. And I've also worked on stories where I felt like it was more important not to take people off the hook, but to leave them in the angst of the wrestle, to leave them with a gut punch that really causes them after the movie. I've had so many people give me this feedback that they first hated a film, like they watch it and like were disgusted or hated it. And then days later, we're still reflecting on it, and later went back to watch it again and again, and then grew an appreciation for it. So I think there's value in both. And ironically, I'm working on two feature films that each embody one of those. So one has this much more powerful, redemptive ending, and the other one is a much more cynical take on sort of the outlook of certain trends in our culture and where that will take us if unchecked. And that one is more of a gut punch. And so I see value in both. I don't feel married to like one way of storytelling where it has to be, all uplifting or all depressing. I think that there's room for mixture. I think maybe the biggest criticism that I fear is a person not feeling anything after they've seen one of my films.
Well, I don't think you're going to have to worry about that, Ben. No, I mean, I know that sounded like a joke, and I didn't quite mean it that way. Maybe I was trying to bring a little bit of levity, but no, a couple things about your films. There's not a one that I forget. There's not a one that I forget. There's not a one that hasn't shaken me from the inside out. There hasn't been one that I don't go home and talk to my kids about.
Right.
And so you're creating unforgettable stories, not just from a CGI MCU standpoint, but from that transformational standpoint. Benji, I want to ask you two quick questions before we start to land here with you. And I love, by the way, the irony that as a documentary filmmaker, we're getting to see your real life travel behind you in the form of Benji's kids. If you're watching this on video, I love that God's telling your story in front of us as a father with kids. I got to ask about an update on the films that you most recently made, which I believe were a 2- and 3-parter where you were taking on the likes of Pornhub. So what's the update on Pornhub? I know that credit card companies were shutting them down, and you were creating all kinds of fantastic godly havoc for Pornhub. What's going on with them, man?
Yeah. So in 2020, we started a campaign called Trafficking Hub to hold the world's largest porn site, Pornhub, and their parent company, MindGeek, who owns 90% of all online pornography, accountable for the hosting, distributing, and profiting from videos of real abuse, child exploitation, trafficking, rape, on, and their reckless disregard for victims who attempted to have those videos removed, and then the mocking and the gaslighting of those victims, both privately and publicly. And so that campaign is still currently underway. We felt at the time like it was something that we would need to dig our heels into for some years to see the kind of substantive change we felt like needed to happen and for them to truly be held accountable. But there's been incredible progress in that campaign. As you mentioned, the major credit card companies have pulled out, both from offering credit card services to users who want to get on the site, as well as to advertisers who would, be would-be advertisers with Pornhub. Their CEO and their COO recently stepped down. We have heard that 70 to 80% of their staff has allegedly been let go.
Wow.
There are dozens and dozens of lawsuits that are being brought against them. And they are, for all intents and purposes, a sinking ship. And so, I look at the success of our Trafficking Up campaign, who really started with my one colleague, Lila, and it's pretty incredible to see the potential for making a substantive difference in the world just through the actions of one person. Now, we came behind her and other people rose their voice and it became a global movement. But it just goes to show that, when we face injustice in the world, there's the response shouldn't always be, well, this is too big for me, or, I could never make a difference, or, what could I do? I'm only a soccer mom, or all the excuses that we come up with, to, silence that voice inside of us telling us that this is something that's not okay. And so just, for people to take courage in the fact that we can make a difference. Like, every decision we make is voting for the kind of world that we want to pass on to our children.
Yeah.
When we see something as unjust as Pornhub, we need to take action. And so we also are currently releasing a series on the porn industry called Beyond Fantasy, which basically blows the roof off of the porn industry and exposes the rot core that is there for all to see. And my hope is that it will empower people who have been in a cycle of pornography consumption and haven't been able to get free. It will empower them to break that cycle of consumption by seeing the rot core for what it is firsthand. When I went and filmed inside the porn industry, I had such a revolting experience that I felt like I wanted to help recreate that feeling in people who watch this film by the way that we shape and craft these movies. So it's a 3-part series. They're each around 30 to 35 minutes long. And one is on the barely legal genre of porn, one is on the violent genre of porn, and one is on the epidemic of STDs in the porn industry. So I think it will give people a much more accurate insight into what pornography is and how it's being created.
Yeah, I saw the first part that you had at a local screening here in Northern California, and wow, man, it was mind blowing is not the word. It was deeply. Benji, as we land, there's a question that Fab and I love to ask, man, which is, looking back at young Benji, maybe the one that was considering becoming a filmmaker, if you today could look back, going back to that storyteller device, and say something to him, what would you say?
I think I had too many reasons. I gave myself too many reasons not to consider this as a legitimate career path. And I had the deep desire to do this, but not the mentorship, the guidance, and the belief in myself to follow through on it. So my path is like a really circuitous path. And I think that, people who are maybe in their late teens, early 20s, I would love to be able to, avoid some of those, unnecessary different path directions.
Yeah.
And to see them fast tracked into their calling, that this world needs people who are authentic storytellers.
Yeah.
And I would love to see people at a young age find the faith in themselves and really just be given the permission. Like, you're not being irresponsible to dream of being a filmmaker. That is an absolutely noble calling. And if you're feeling that, I just put all your chips in and don't look back.
I love that.
I've never heard it described. Not too many people understand it deeply enough and have the sense of care and just a sense of respect in all that you have for the craft.
Yeah.
To call it a noble calling. Yeah. I love the enemy would ironically, of all creatures uncreated or whatever, the enemy calling creativity irresponsible sounds like the counterfeit parent. And here you are as the true father saying, no, actually, it's the most responsible, noble thing. Benji, man, it's always just a privilege to hear you speak on this art form that we hold so dear. And you're just an encouragement. We got to get you in to talk to our film students, because the anointing that you carry, the gift, the charge, the conviction that you're releasing on the planet, man. We applaud you. We pray for you. We lift you up, and just know that Fab and I, our students, that Bethel Conservatory of the Arts just lifts up and backs you. You've got an army of the next generation of storytellers coming to lift up your arms, man.
Yeah.
I love it. Thank you guys so much. I think every time I talk with you guys, I feel like it pulls things out of me, because I know I'm in like-minded company, and I know how much you guys cherish the arts and honor this space yourselves. And I just so appreciate that you're pouring your lives out for the next generation. It's such a gift to your students that you guys could be off pursuing your own careers. And there's some of that, but you guys are giving so much of your lives to passing this on. And I love that. I just enjoy the company and the fellowship. And so I look forward to it every time. Like I said, you guys have been incredible friends to me, and I just appreciate you so much. So thank you again for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Benji. It's always a pleasure, brother. Thank you so much. And where can people get in contact with Exodus Cry? Is it www.exoduscry.org?
ExodusCry.com or our production site, Magic Lantern Pictures. Pictures.
Brilliant. We'll put that in the notes below, and people can start following you and looking at your tremendous material. Benji, thank you so much, dude. It's been such a pleasure and an honor.
Thanks for hanging out with us on Storia.
Bless you, bro. God
bless you. See you soon.